Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com. Here on Equine Assisted World, we look at the cutting edge and the best practices currently being developed and established in the equine assisted field. This can be psychological, this can be psych, this can be physical, this can be all of the conditions that human beings have that these lovely equines, these beautiful horses that we work with, help us with. Thank you for being part of the adventure, and we hope you enjoy today's show. Welcome to Equine Assisted World. We have two extraordinarily interesting guests on tonight. We've got Professor Anne Hemingway from the University of Bournemouth, and her researcher, Kezia Sullivan, who at some point in the not too distant future will, I'm sure, also be Dr. Kezia Sullivan. And they have been doing really interesting work in our equine assisted field. More than that, Professor Anne has been researching what we do for about 12 years now. And what's exciting is that not only are they helping to legitimize in the eyes of government, in the eyes of insurance companies and so on and so forth, what we do, but also they have come up with some rather groundbreaking ways of conducting studies on individual equine assisted programs, which, unlike the usual very torturous way of getting studies done, which involves years and years and years and lots of money and running into all the right contacts and being connected to universities, they found a way to streamline that, to make it more efficient. So listen up, because if you are running a program, you might want to contact these people about the possibility of running a study onto what you do. So this is fascinating stuff. I met Anne only recently and virtually because Kezia, her assistant, had come on a horseboy training in England. And when we asked people, as we always do in the training, what do you do? Why are you here? And she said, well, I'm a researcher and I research equine assisted programs. I sort of pooped my pants and sat down in it because I thought, well, I didn't even know people did that for a living. I thought that was sort of something that happened occasionally to a godlike species over there somewhere who happened to be well connected. I didn't realize that there were actually people sort of going around and doing this. And I realized that that's how far our field has come. So without further ado, welcome Anne and Kezia. Professor Anne, can you tell us who you are and why you got into this in the first place?
Yes, so I'm a professor of public health and wellbeing in the UK, and I run a centre for public health. And I've been around horses all my life. So I love horses. I'm passionate about horses. I have my own horses. I love all equines. And if I pass something in the field in the car, I break my neck trying to look at it and see how many there are, and what sort of horse or equine they are. And it's always been like that for me since I was a child. So that's one reason why. Another reason is I was about 12, 13 years ago. I was a Marie Curie funded research fellow that's funded through the European Commission, looking at behaviour change. And obviously behaviour change, health behaviour change is a massive public health issue. And I'm sure you're all aware of that and the amount of research that goes on into how to make us all behave more healthily, eat more healthily, get more exercise and not to smoke and not to drink too much and to think about our mental health, etc. So I was busy doing that across different countries in Europe. And I came back to my own university at the time and listened to a PhD student presenting their work. And they ran an equine assisted service on the Isle of Wight in the UK. And in the audience was someone else who was running equine assisted service. And I had a bit of an aha moment. And I thought, oh, look at this. This is happening. And this is growing. And this is a thing. And I thought, how fascinating that people are trying to change behavior using these different modalities. They're trying to change behavior, relationship type behavior, it seemed to me. And as life is all about relationships and connections, I thought this has real potential, and this is possibly including horses and humans, means that it's not using what we normally do in public health is to like appeal to someone's better nature, try and get them to change what they're doing. Or we do what's called nudging, where we make small changes and we try to influence their behavior. This must be tapping into a different kind of a mechanism. And that's where the scientists took over in my brain, I suppose. And I thought, well, how is that working? What's it doing? Who's it working for? How is it working? And I must have a look at it. So I guess for me, that was when I decided it was fascinating and it was important. And I'd already started to look at care farming a bit and people having contact with nature and those kind of things. And of course, we're part of nature and so are horses. So I thought this is an extension of the same thing for me, essentially, in many ways, but with this unique creature, this unique being involved. So I guess that was it. That's how it happened for me.
Can I ask you a layman's question? When you say behavioral change, I mean, I think that's the sort of thing where it sounds like a self-evident thing, but what does that really actually mean in terms of clinical? So what is behavioral change? What is a behavioral change
Yeah, well,
study or program?
It's changing the way that you respond in a habitual sense, really. So if you've got ways that you respond, habits that you have, and those can be, as I say, the traditional health-related habits, which are diet, exercise, smoking, and etc. But they're also very importantly, in terms of people's mental health, it's about how you relate to others and the types of behavior you exhibit in everyday life, which can hugely benefit you as an individual or can really not benefit you and can become quite negative in relation to children and young adults, in terms of your development. It's important to remember that young children experience the world as an environment full of relationships. That's how they experience it, as a network of relationships. And if these relationships affect all aspects of their development, so if there's behaviors which challenge or interrupt or don't enable them to develop those relationships, then that has a massive impact on their development and their opportunities as they grow up and for the rest of their lives, essentially. So I guess behavior change is about changing habits, and that can be habitual habits in terms of eating, drinking, exercise, smoke, but it can also be habitual habits around how we interact with others.
Okay, that was a really good explanation. So it's basic. So I guess to a layman such as myself, it would obviously lend itself to things like addiction, and eating disorders, and perhaps violent behaviors or dysfunctional or antisocial behaviors. But I could see how it could also, would you say, could it also be used to impact your relationship with yourself? That there's how we relate to the world around us, but you can never really separate that, of course, from what's going on internally.
Yeah, totally. It's about how we view ourselves and how important or unimportant we see ourselves as being.
Okay.
And
you were already measuring this. This was already your job.
Behavior change was very much my area that I was working in public health. My PhD focused on that in deprived communities a long time ago, and showed me that, again, it was all relational. It was all about context, and often people's relationships massively impacted on their behavior and vice versa.
Okay. What would you say, before we move on to how you ended up seeing the value of this with equine? And of course, you say you've been a lifelong, horsewoman and horse lover. And like any of us, I guess, who have been with horses all our lives, we know that that's all about relationship, because, what else have we got but relationship with our horse? And so on. Sometimes we're doing it well, sometimes we're doing it not so well, but we've all observed this, I think. But looking at it in more detail as you have, what would you say are the most important components of an individual's ability to relate to others within our species to ensure a sort of functional happy, healthy life? What are there some like prime markers that
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've found so far is calmness without any doubt, and also being able to understand the other's point of view or try to understand the other's point.
okay,
Um,
so what psychologists would call theory of mind and force, sort
yeah,
of understanding that other people think something differently to you.
yeah. There are, and others would call it empathy.
Right.
They were thinking that others might not have understood. They might not have the same views as you, for sure. And I think calmness and empathy or understanding the other's viewpoint are both absolutely crucial for a relationship. And seeing yourself as important enough to have a relationship with, all about those issues of kind of self-worth, confidence and self-esteem for sure are also very, very relevant. And I think, you need to be curious about others as well.
Mm.
And I think that's where the horses help us too, because we have something called involution rather than evolution, which anthropologists talk about. And involution is about having a fascination with other species. And I'd say as humans, we know we've got that because we have endless evidence. But as I believe that horses may have some of that too.
That's a word I hadn't heard before. Thank you for that. Involution, the
Yeah,
fascination and curiosity about other
the
species.
species. Yeah.
Okay. That makes perfect sense to me because, as you may know, I've spent a lot of time living with hunting and gathering people. And of course, seeing the sort of human original blueprint, if you like. And of course, you can't separate that from that way of life, that culture. To be
Mm.
successful in it, you have to be incredibly curious and therefore knowledgeable eventually about other species of animal and plant because that's what you're living from. Do you think that, although presumably our species has this innately, do you feel that these sort of generations and generations and generations of separation from nature, i.e. other species, that is nature, right? Do you feel
Mm.
that that is what has impacted us to the point where we seem to be needing these types of mental health interventions at all? What do you think is behind it? Why do you think we are at this stage where mental health is now such a prevalent conversation? What's happened? What's gone wrong with us? Whether we've lost our involution to you or that we've separated ourselves from it?
Well, I don't know if Kez would agree. I'll give her a chance to have a go as well. But I think that we are very separated from other beings, and we have a bit of an obsession with each other to the exclusion of the rest of the planet. Really, we also have a bit of an obsession with how people feel about things, which is very important. But we'd also need to consider the evidence, about and research and the evidence about what's happening in our world. And I think we've become very inward looking. Our separation from nature has made us become very inward looking. And we do tend to look in at other humans rather than out at other species and the rest of the world, etc. And if you're a scientist, some forms of science force you to do that. But you always you always in science have to look at a global perspective. You're always looking at the evidence from South America or from Africa or wherever, as well as your own country. It kind of makes you do it. And I think increasingly we're getting more inward looking, unfortunately, and a bit obsessed with the minutiae of interaction, which puts a lot of pressure on people to be perfect. And I think and that's what horses do. Horses will take away your ego. Horses are not interested in perfection. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They're interested in that relationship. They're interested in knowing how you feel and how you feel about them, first and foremost, and what your intentions are, rather than whether you're perfect or not. So that's why they're so good for us. Sorry, Kaz, I'll let you have a go at that
I just want, just before we go to Kaz, I just
one.
want to quote this back to you, what you just said. Horses don't care what you know or how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
That's great. Is that yours or did
No,
you get that from
I'm
someone?
sure I've stolen that from someone.
Okay,
Probably a
brilliant. Well, I'm going to nick it immediately now.
more person. I'm sure I've nicked that, but I think it's for me. That's what it's all about
Mm,
because you need to show care through your body to
mm,
the horses all the time from start to finish. From the moment their eyes meet yours,
mm.
you need to show that you care and that you're acknowledging them, and that teaches us a massive lesson about relationship. Which I think again, and also because we're online, we forget about that embodied part of relationships, which is so, so important and which we lost a bit during COVID and doing online things like this, where it's harder to work out what the intentions of others are without seeing their body language. And it's really important for us.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. There's a lot here I want to go back to. Kez, what got you into doing this? Why are you researching this field, and what do you feel about this? Do you feel that the separation from nature, which we know has been going on since at least the Industrial Revolution, but do you think it's accelerated lately? Do you think we're at a crisis point? What what's motivating you?
Sure. So I'll start with kind of nature aspect, I suppose, because I really agree with Anne that if we lose the kind of holistic communication, we start to run into difficulties. And we have this idea with care of, a good enough mother, and nobody is perfect, right? Nobody's succeeding in showing a perfect amount of care all the time. But it is that kind of staying out of the minutiae and able to look at the whole, look at the intent, look at the kind of those aspects of it. And then I think we're kind of automatically more embodied. So we're looking internally with an external lens because we're saying, well, what am I picking up from the environment and the context? So we might be quite sensory and inward looking, but much less of this kind of top down from the mind, sort of over analytical type of aspect. So yeah, when you're in nature, it's of course such a sensory experience, right? Because everything is, either hot or cold or damp or thorny. And I think that might be accounting for it. So the less we go out in nature, the less we're integrating that sensory experience.
Then one hears the word embodied. You just used that term embodied. It's one of these terms one hears. You think, oh yeah, embodied. Actually, I don't know what that means. What does embodied really mean?
So I think different people potentially categorize it differently, but the way that I was using it there was kind of willing to listen to what is coming up from the body. So there's this idea of the three brains. We have the gut brain, the heart brain, and the brain brain. So able to pick up all of the signals that we get, kind of body is tuning for.
Okay, that was a really good answer. I've just got what you said is willing to listen to what's coming up from the body, willing to listen to the three brains. I think one of the pieces of now sort of neuroscientifically accepted wisdom that still may not be so widely known is that, as I know you guys know, that the heart and the brain and the gut are all actually composed of neurons, and that this is something which was not so well known a few years ago. Now we sort of take it for granted, but that if we've got neurons in the brain, neurons in the gut, and neurons in the heart, then presumably it's one system rather than some sort of hierarchical system or the intellect as the only thing that counts. But okay, so back to the question then of why do you think it's reached a point where people like you and Anne are getting support from institutions to go out and research something that embodies and looks at relationship and behavioral change through specifically horses? What's happened in the last 5-10 years that's making these institutions go, well, actually, yeah, people like Kez and Anne, we sort of need to fund them?
So I'd love to hear from Anne on this, but my first thought is that in this case, theory is kind of following practice because people have been very successfully using these interventions for quite a long time now. And there's so much need that people, they're having to start using them even when the evidence might not be there yet.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of course, the ability to research it will follow that.
Maybe then back to Anne, why do you think that the institutions, though, are now suddenly, because I remember when I was at the beginning with Horseboy and we were getting poo-pooed, everywhere, even though from the get-go, we were affiliated to the University of Texas. I think we did our first study in 2013, I think, when the first study was published on us. But yet, people still treated us as if we were just a bunch of hippies. And it's actually true, we are just a bunch of hippies, but we just happen to be a bunch of hippies that were doing something that seemed to work. And neuroscientists eventually came in and explained why. But what's changed now? Why have we left the hippie margins, and why are we entering the mainstream of science with this now?
Well, I think there's a much greater understanding around the horses as well, and around mammals and the range of emotions that mammals can have, and the level of awareness they have, or sentience, depending on what kind of language you want to use. So there's a very great awareness, much greater awareness and acceptance of the fact that you can have a constructive relationship, and that they understand us, our body language. They can understand it if we're clear and calm, and that we can understand theirs as well. So that's one side of it, I think, for sure. And that also there's several studies which show that horses understand human body language and emotion and respond to them, and that horses have different facial expressions, for instance, and those kind of things. So that's part of it. From the human side, I think it's a recognition that nature is essential, and that contact with horses is part of that access to nature. It's also recognizing that you can't medicalize your way out of all the problems that we have. We haven't got a pill, or we shouldn't be giving people pills for things, when we can change things in other ways, in the way that I was speaking about. We can change the way people feel about things, the way they behave, how they respond in their lives. We can change it in a myriad different ways. And one of those that we know about now, or we're starting to understand, is that relationship with horses. And I think people are starting to understand, although it's still quite limited, that there's a difference between us and a prey animal, and that in that case we have to moderate what we do in order to be acceptable for the horse, and it's not the other way round. And that the way that we modify ourselves is, if you like, practicing an effective relationship with another.
That's a great quote. The way we modify ourselves, and the way we modify ourselves around horses is a great practice for how we need to moderate ourselves around perhaps others, and perhaps especially more vulnerable people. That's a great quote. Thank you. My question, though, because I think a lot of us, obviously, you've been around horses and working in mental health and that sort of, we know, but on the institutional level and on the media level, something has shifted in terms of is it just that an old guard has died off? The old codgers have just retired and, left room for some new blood in the last 5-10 years? Or because it just seems to me there has been a bit of a seismic shift here.
Yeah, there's also a big recognition, as I said, that healthcare services are never going to be up to the job of dealing with. There's never going to be enough capacity to deal with the level of distress that we have now. And I know in the UK, we have our mental health services that are pretty much overwhelmed with need, particularly in children and young adults. And maybe that's not the way to go. There's a growing realization that maybe labeling people and putting them in a box forever is not the way to go. We need some other strategies which don't label people, which don't force people to share over and over their issues that they've got, which can be re-traumatizing. And that we need to try some different approaches. But I do think we're in a difficult time at the moment, because I can tell you, Kez and I had a paper which was rejected from a journal recently because we know that works. So that's not, that's nothing new. So we won't publish it. Right. This is equine assisted. We know it works. So why do we need to publish that on it? And then from the research funders,
so almost like a victim of your own success.
And then from the research funders, they said, well, we're not absolutely sure you've got enough evidence that we're going to fund a big, big trials in this yet. So we're at this old sort of point, and I think in some places it's much more accepted than others, and some types of it are much more accepted in some places than others. In the UK, what's growing seems to be much more about learning, so it's kind of learning social skills, social interactions, learning calmness, learning to be empathic, learning to be effective, learning to be assertive, all those kind of things. And it's not so much what's being funded through local authorities, for instance, now is not so much related to riding for the disabled, for instance. It's focused more on mental health and behavioural issues, particularly in children, young adults, to deal with the number of school exclusions, the number of youngsters who are struggling, building relationships, progressing through their education, etc. So that seems to be the area that's taking off in the UK more. And it can be with to me, it can be with different groups as well. People might already have a label, but it will still work. Interestingly, it often still works in the same way, because we're all human beings. We're all in it together, and we're all on this continuum in terms of how effective we are at relationships and things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that I guess I'm trying to sort of, the journalist in me and the historian in me is looking for evidence in what you're saying to, like, where did this shift happen? And I mean, I think a lot of us could obviously point to COVID and what's happened since then. But it does seem that I'm just latching onto something you said a few minutes ago, where you said there's a beginning to be a knowledge that you can't medicate your way out of these problems. And I think that to me, do you agree that maybe is the great shift? I think that when I was first, for example, as an autism dad back in the sort of early 2000s, the overwhelming pressure that was put on me and most other parents in my position to medicate. Now, they still do put that pressure on, but there was a sort of assumption among the psychologists, and it wasn't really psychiatrists who were dealing with it, the neurologists, I suppose, that was going to be the only way, that and or behavioral therapies. And you say you're changing behavior, or you're interested in how to change behavior. And of course, the behaviorists, like the ABA people and so on, would say, well, we're interested in the same thing. But of course, when I looked at ABA with my kid, I found it coercive and causing distress. So I went away from it. But what's the difference then between the programs that you're looking at that are changing behaviors in relationship and something as clinically or perhaps rigidly structured or as behaviorism? What's shifted there?
Yeah, we go back to Kez's point about the whole body being functioning without this Cartesian split between mind and body.
Okay.
And seeing it as one. And we're realizing now and again, this is happening in the science to some extent, depending on who you speak to, that if you're relaxed and calm in your body and you begin to, do whatever, deep breathing or more exercise or whatever it is in your body, then it calms your mind. So the mind doesn't only work downwards towards the body, the mind is also influenced by what you're doing in the body. So if you're practicing becoming calm in your body, it will calm your mind.
Okay. So I want to go to some of the studies that you've done and are doing. Before that, just humor me again with I'm belaboring this point about institutional acceptance, because to the outside eye, we know that this is important. Well, at what point did the University of Bournemouth said, "Yeah, all right, Anne, this is great. This playing with ponies stuff. It's all right. Yeah, we'll support you in that," rather than, sod off with your silly playing with ponies thing. Was there a shift with that? Was there a stage at which they were saying, "Oh, don't be so silly. It's just playing with ponies," and then they were like, "Oh, actually, no, maybe there's some good science there," or were they actually always pretty supportive?
Well, it was more about, to be honest, it's almost still slightly the case that the big funders as I mentioned before, are not quite there yet.
Okay.
But the smaller funding are there, and we've had some funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and
From the which foundation? Sorry,
Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And
Anthony.
we have
Anthony.
right?
Is that Anthony Fairbairn? Did you say?
Esme.
How do you spell?
Esme, ESME.
Oh, Esme
Yeah, Esme
Fairbairn Foundation.
Foundation with the horse course. And
Okay.
we've had some seed corn funding from my university now as well. So I think it's a combination of beginning to have publications which are more, publications are kind of the currency of academics, if you
Yeah.
like. So peer-reviewed international scientific papers are the currency that we work in. So once you start to get those papers accepted through a peer review process, then people start to think, oh, okay. Because the other thing is that the media are always looking out for what's new and innovative in terms of those publications. So then you get approached by the media, and the university gets very interested in that too. So the scientific paper and being approached by the media and asked to write things about it in editorials or in what we have a publication in the UK called The Conversation, which invites academics to write about emerging areas and write in a kind of accessible style, so as it can be understood more broadly than by scientists. I think more grant money will work, as always, but I think it's a combination. It's actually very like any new scientific idea. Any new scientific idea has to build traction. And some people have looked at this in a systematic way, and they find about 25 years of starting to produce different types of evidence and building and building and building. You'll get through to the point where it's more generally, it's flipped, then it becomes more generally accepted, even within healthcare.
Okay. That was a really good answer. Thank you. So we must be somewhere towards that 20 or 25 year tipping point. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting older, so presumably it must be. Okay.
No comment.
Ouch. I believe I just pulled this knife out of my back, and I believe this knife is yours. So, okay. Was there for you a breakthrough study? What was the study that sort of got you from that you published? That was the first one that made people start to take what you were saying and finding out about equine assisted stuff seriously. That there must have been a particular study that was the one.
There was one in 2015 which looked at young offenders, and which was in Society and Animals, I think. And we did a variety. We did interviews, we did observation, we did a variety of different data collection methods, and we did a small group. We put a small group through 25, I think. It was very small. We went and looked at their reoffending data 1 year after they'd completed the horse course. And it was a bigger reduction than anything that the psychology team were offering in the prison, percentage-wise. And it was very small, but it's a very blunt measure. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like the domestic violence paper that Kez and I published last year. They're very blunt measures, but it's difficult to argue with that. Do you know what I mean? So in my mind,
it's very hard to argue with a blunt measure. It's true.
Yeah, it's and in my mind, I started to think, oh, look at that. That's really interesting.
Okay, so 2015, young offenders in prisons.
Yeah,
that was an equine program, the horse course.
Yeah,
and the reoffending went down. Did you get a number on it?
I can't remember. We did have a percentage, but forgive me, I can't remember. It was between 25 and 30%.
Okay, significant.
Yeah, really significant. Yeah. So that was kind of a clue for me, and I thought, and these are, the most difficult. This young offenders dealing with the most difficult young offenders in the UK. They get shipped around from everywhere. So it was a really challenging group. And I thought, oh my goodness, look at that. But how interesting is that? What's happening with the horses that influences that? know? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you that question in a minute. Kez, so Anne just mentioned a study in domestic violence. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was a observational study that we did in 2022. And we had data from a local authority with outcomes that they just track anyway. So we didn't have to go anywhere near the intervention. We just had the data come. So it was all very anonymous.
Yeah.
And it was a case comparison study. So we had people in the data who had had no intervention, and we had people in the data who had had a social worker assigned, but nothing further. We had people who had an intervention of some sort, but we didn't know what that might be. And that could be really varied. My understanding is that it could range from sort of having a bit of childcare to, all kinds of other things. And then we had the people who had attended the intervention, and they were also grouped into family groups. So we could see whether, a family of 6 had had one person attempt. And it was a 5-day intervention and kind of traipsed through this data set. And at the end found that not only did the intervention significantly reduce the incidence of domestic violence at a 1-year follow-up, but that it actually reduced it by 51%.
Okay.
Whereas for context, if you do nothing, if people are not assigned any help, it stays level, but actually goes up very slightly. So yeah, it's really important.
So that's basically effectively a double-blind study, right? Because you had control group there and...
Not quite, I don't think. I think we'd need to sort of randomize it.
Okay. But certainly close to that. Well, you said the intervention. Okay. So if the intervention brought things down by 51% a year later, what was it? Can you say what the intervention was?
So it was the horse course.
It was the horse course. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that twice now.
Yeah.
Okay. And the horse course, as we know, has just received some media and awards, right, in the UK. Why did you, which clearly effective, why did you look at the horse course? What attracted you to that particular intervention?
So the reason that I was looking at the horse course is actually tied into how I got into this research. Because when I was looking to start, I'd always wanted to do it. I'd always wanted to research pretty much exactly this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had horses growing up, and then I went to Chicken Shed and kind of which is an inclusive theatre, and kind of put 2 and 2 together. So I knew I wanted to be researching this, and I went online and looked for interventions that had an evidence page because I assumed that they would be up for doing more research. So I emailed and they put me in contact with Anne. So, to be honest, for me, centres that highlight that they're happy to do research is quite a key thing, actually, because...
Okay, that's good to know. Listeners, Did you prick your ears up at that one? On your webpage, have you got something that says, hey, Kez and Anne, we are up for doing research, please? Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, for example, when I was first starting out with Horseboy, it never occurred to me that we would or would not get involved with research. We were just very busy doing what we were doing. And that, of course, I think is true of a lot of people that set up and then get going with programs. And then very quickly they become busy and overwhelming and, locally successful generally for the reasons that you've just pointed out. But we attracted attention from graduate students who wanted to do studies, but they were the ones who approached us. It never occurred to us to go out and make approaches. And it still does not to this day. And even though we've had, I don't know how many studies have been done on it now, we just had a PhD published on movement method, which is our non-horse intervention. These things have all happened somewhat organically. Do you think that it would accelerate the development and legitimization of the field if the centers and the programs themselves were now actively going and trying to make contact with people like you and say, could you please come and look at us? Or would that be overwhelming for you? Is that not really helpful?
Well, firstly, I'm always happy to be contacted, and I'm sure so is Anne. But a couple of things that I would think of there is, firstly, if you're a centre, please, and you want to do research, just please don't underestimate how shy grad students can be. It's not in everybody's. I know I was feeling incredibly shy when I reached out to Harriet, and I only did it because she had an evidence page on her website. So even if you don't have any evidence yet, but you'd love someone to come and have a look, just put an evidence page and say, come and have a look. And
What would that look like? So let's say I was doing it, because I think this would be really helpful for people that might be driving in their cars right now and they've got some amazing project going on up in North Yorkshire or in South Carolina or wherever, right? No one's heard of them, but they know they're doing great work. And I know so many places like this. Would it be worth their while to do something like jot down on a Word document what they've seen over, say, anecdotally over a 5-year period with some specifics and say, is it worth looking at this? Is it, or ought they to be gathering data in some way that would be helpful for you if they then did reach out to you and say, well, hey, look, we've gathered this data in this way that's actually sort of number crunchable for you already. And if so, what would be the way in which they would gather that data?
Well, Anne has a point that I hope you won't mind me bringing up, that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So for a lot of people doing programs which are very similar to each other, for example, there's not necessarily a need to evidence every single one of them in a different way. And hopefully Anne will expand on that in a minute for me. But the thing I would say about that is when I'm speaking with an organisation that wants to do research, because people quite often reach out, I'm always interested in who they're working with. So what's the kind of clients that they have, who's coming and what do they need? What kind of outcomes are they seeing? So for example, a lot of places are improving confidence, but if somebody is improving something that's maybe really tough to improve, or maybe we haven't necessarily got it well evidenced yet, then I'm always interested in evidencing that. So I was speaking with somebody recently who worked at a hospice, and we know that emotional health and physical health is so closely linked. So that's the kind of thing that my ears pick up at, which is like, oh, has anyone looked at this? And kind of getting to those outside outcomes. And then sure, if they have a good data process already there, that's always helpful. And there are for sure ways to do that. But I would say it could be a bit of an ask to do it if you don't know what you're going to look at yet.
Yeah. So Anne, what would somebody need to do if they were gonna, everyone's busy, you're busy, Kez is busy. So if someone, reaches out to you, it's a bit like reaching out to a publisher and, they're getting a bunch of manuscripts on their desk. They've only got so much bandwidth.
Yeah.
In what way would they have gathered data where you would look at that and go, oh yeah, we could look at that?
Well, as Chris mentioned, we're getting maybe to the point where when people start a new intervention, it's worthwhile thinking carefully about whether you can use an existing model which has an existing evidence base associated with it.
Right.
Because if you do that, then if you use that same model and you apply it in the same way, then you will get the same result. Every centre in the whole world that does hip replacement doesn't have to prove their own value for their own hip replacement that they've done in London or Los Angeles or whatever it is, because there's a body of evidence already that says hip replacements work, right? So that's number one, to start thinking in that way across the sector for people starting a new.
So look for the studies that have already been done, basically, that bolster what you might want to do. How would they find those?
Well,
people have got not the first idea. You're talking about horse people here, driving around in muddy SUVs that smell of dogs. I mean, that and they're just worried about have they got enough gas to put it in that thing?
Well, how do they find it? HETI is a really useful organisation in terms
Which
of
one?
looking at HETI.
HETI, HETI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is
Yeah.
that particularly useful for
Well,
this?
because they're interested in education and research for the
Okay.
equine assisted services. So join up, go to meetings, and start to look at the literature. Now there is in some
I love those
countries.
go to meetings like standing on, hello, my name's Rupert Isaacson and I'm an equine therapist.
Yeah. But how do you have meetings and online, like online sessions and all the rest of it globally, and conferences and all. So it's an organisation, Horses and Education Therapy International, which is definitely worth looking at. There are open access journals now, and there is open access information. All of my studies and the work that Kez has been involved in is freely available online. Now, I
So
won't
let
put the
me
rights right now.
just pause you there. I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you to develop that. So again, you're talking about horsey people that do equine intervention programs. You are not talking about academics here.
Okay.
So when
we'll
you say
go one
it's
step
open
back
source,
again.
people don't even know what that means.
Okay.
That's like saying it's, a SpaceX project that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Okay.
they-
So what is it? What does that mean?
If they want to look at the scientific literature on something, they put a scientific related question into Google. So they go into Google and they say, what works for equine assisted? What programs have evidence? What papers are available? And Google will come up with quite a lot. And if you're
Papers are available for proving equine intervention? So
yeah. So
okay.
what science has been done around equine assisted? What works?
So a simple Google.
Yeah. We'll come up with some result. Now, it's variable, and this is the massive issue, which I'm involved with Hetty about, trying to build a better access to science for equine assisted practitioners. And that is a massive project in itself. But some countries, like in the UK, all my work has to be freely available online on Google. So if you put in Anne Hemingway equine assisted,
Okay.
it will all be available. You just click on it and it comes up.
Okay. Well, that you see again to somebody like me who's pre-Cro-Magnon, when I grew up, Mastodon was still bellowing to Mastodon across the primeval swamp. So even a Google sometimes can be overwhelming to me. I don't know what to put in. But that was very useful to say Anne Hemingway. So if someone said, okay, I'm working with mental health in horses in some way, and I kind of want to find out what are the studies out there that support what I do, so I can go to my local authority and say, look, there's a study or two studies. They could type in Anne Hemingway studies. Okay, that makes sense to a brain like
and
that.
other people who published as well. We're not the only kids on the block, as it were. There are other people doing it.
Would other people pop up after you? Like, would there be Anne Hemingway and then related?
Pop up if they put in, research evidence on equine assisted. Yeah, other people will pop up as well. But sorry, Kez.
Sorry, just want to mention there's also a tool called Google Scholar. So if you literally Google Scholar, the only results you get back will be at least white papers, which means a kind of academic article. It might not always have been published in a journal, but it will be linked to the evidence base. And then on the right-hand side of the screen that comes up, if they're open access, there'll be a short little link and you can click into it. And if they're not open access, you can still read what's called the abstract, which is like a summary paragraph. So all of Anne and I's is open access, but you can, if you're just having a look, you can potentially read an abstract as well.
What is a white paper when it's at home? You say that, it sounds like a blank sheet of paper. Why do they call it a white paper?
So it's not news, it's not PR. It's a paper that's been written usually by an academic to go into some detail on a subject.
Okay, cool. All right. So
the other thing is, sorry.
Yeah.
Your original question was about what people should do. And they need to look at the science, although as we've shown, that's a thought, that can be difficult. But equally for me, if people are being sent client referrals by someone, why are they sending them? What are the outcomes that they've agreed with these referrers? Because that mechanism must be happening, otherwise they wouldn't have anyone. Or if people come on their own or with their parents or whatever, why are they bringing them? What is it that they're hoping to achieve? What, do they collect any information? Do they have a referral sheet which says, you know, this person's coming with X, Y, and Z, and we want you to work on Z, please. You know what I mean? So that
I do.
that type of information is really helpful.
So this is my question then, because I'm thinking about all the people driving around in, the kind of cars that we all drive around in between the chores that we're all doing, thinking, okay, this is starting to make sense. What kind of format should they collect this information in? So, okay, again, just so people can understand, let's say it was me 10 years ago or so, and, I've got all these autism families coming to me, and what they're looking for usually was communication. They were looking for speech because it was known that my son had become verbal in the saddle. And then that moved very quickly into their siblings who might have diagnoses like ADHD and that sort of thing, or anxiety. And we found that what we were doing seemed to work for them too. But we, at that stage, didn't know why. If I had been wanting to gather data then, what format, how literally when I got a piece of paper out, what should the heading be, the subheading be, how should it look?
So what are you looking for in terms of trying to evaluate the effect of what you're doing? Is you want to know what people come in with, why they're there with you, and what they leave with.
What they come in with, why they perceive the need for you, and what they leave with. Okay. Now, because you could make that up. I could say, well, they all, sprouted pink wings and flew off to fairyland, and that was which.
Yeah.
So how do you?
So in some way, you need to capture that. So ideally, your referral form gives you enough detail about the types of people you're getting and the reasons why you're getting them,
so
as well as age and gender and all those things. So they need some kind of input. Yeah. And they need some kind of exit assessment.
Okay.
And then ideally, they need another assessment in 2 or 3 months as minimum, which is saying, does it last? Or, the minute we got home, it was all.
What happened when the drugs wore off? Yeah. Okay. So an input, an intake form, an exit form, and then a follow-up form, perhaps a quarter of a year later or something like that. How should those forms be structured? Are there templates that anyone could download off the internet? Or do you have to make up your own?
You can make up your own, or I know that Harriet loves to share. Harriet Laurie at the horse course loves to, one of the reasons for her charity is to share everything. So she's probably got her.
So people could
if they've got a query, then and there's a well-established centre, that's had studies and done studies, they can ask for help, I'm sure. But basically what you're looking at is...
I might just pull you up on a reality check with that one. It's a massively factional and offensive world, unfortunately. And not every organization is willing to help other organizations, sadly. And sometimes new kids on the block can be perceived as threats by the older kids. So, and I think a lot of people are very shy also to approach horsey people about stuff. But you said that the horse course
the horse course love to share. They love to share, and they've got a website. You just put in the horse course, all one word, no gap, and it will all come up.
So the horse course people would be a resource to go to if you want to put a format together.
Some of the other people we're working with now as well, I think, also, wouldn't they, Kez, probably?
Yeah, the people we tend to work with tend, unsurprisingly, I guess, to be pretty collaborative.
Yeah.
Right.
They're pretty friendly.
Yeah. So, but I would say if you want the bare minimum, you've got to have some biographical information.
Right.
So you want to know kind of where that person lives, what their age is, what their gender is, what problems they have, and why they're being referred to you. That kind of basic information.
And that could just be one sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the exit form similarly, and the
And the
follow-up
exit
form.
form, yeah. And then what you need to do is once you start to think and maybe brainstorm with your team and talk to your participants and if they're arriving with parents and carers and all the rest of it, talk to them. What do you think they're getting out of it? What have they got? Even do a little project. If you've got a research-minded member of staff who doesn't mind phoning people up after they've done the program and saying, how did it help you? What kinds of things did it help you with?
Or having a questionnaire, maybe.
Yeah, but then you don't want to do a questionnaire until you've spoken to people because you don't know what to put in it, right?
No.
So the first thing should always be more open questions. If you want to explore, if you don't have that information, those ideas already, you want to explore them in a more open way. And then you can develop your own tool. Or, as I said before, you can look around for other people's tools. And there's also validated tools. So if people are consistently saying to you, I think this person, it feels like they can take charge of their life a bit more. They have an influence over what happens to them in their lives after they attended your program. And so then you might want to say, oh, that sounds like self-efficacy, and I might be able to use a validated tool that already exists. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, but until you've had those preliminary conversations or a grad student has, or one of your staff members or your team members or whoever it is, you don't know what questions to ask. You're kind of in the dark a bit. So we're coming to the conclusion that there are some fairly standard areas that are impacted, as we've talked about this evening, like calmness, like communication, like understanding other points of view, empathy,
Confidence.
Maybe confidence as a learner, to more positive relationships, so we're building up this bank of kind of stuff that might be being impacted on by equine assisted. But I would say if you haven't looked at it at all, then you really need to do that little bit of preliminary work before you start routinely collecting this data, which you absolutely should do, but you need to know what to collect. Otherwise, you could be collecting stuff on X and you're doing Y.
Right. No, I get that. And I think when people I've known who have tried to do this for their programs sometimes overcollect, and then they present people with just too much bump because, you're trying to be a good boy or good girl and get as much as possible. So is less more to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to the participant parents, carers, I would add the commissioner or the referrers,
Okay.
who is sending people to you? What do they want to see? Why are they sending them? It's not always, to be honest, it's not always fantastically helpful. We're still again at that point where sometimes the commissioners go, oh, it's such a nice thing for people to do.
To go and play with the pony.
Yeah, and which they're right, it is, but that's only one part of the picture, as we all know. So you don't want to undervalue yourselves either. And I have put a bit of in people I've been speaking to recently, put a bit of a red light around well-being tools, oversimplified well-being tools, which don't give a proper insight into all the different things you could be achieving with an equine-assisted intervention.
Right.
And you can kind of undervalue yourself.
That's right. I think Kez, you pointed this out once when we were chatting and I thought this was a good point, that someone often thinks in an equine program that they're doing like a thing, but actually they're doing like 50 things, and they just are so used to doing 50 things that they take it for granted. And then you would come along and say, well, actually, no, hold on. You think you're just doing this one thing, but actually you're doing these 50 things. And I would agree. I think that that's pretty ubiquitous across the board with people that work in these sorts of programs, because the context of each person that comes in is so different. And I think because horse people, I don't know if you agree, but I think people that are good horse people are quite responsive, because you kind of have to be with horses, right? Horses show up with what they show up with, and you have to kind of roll with it and be resourceful. And so that and you have to empathize or you get stomped on. We all learned that one early. Yeah. So, that gives you some quite good tools for this work. But then you think, well, I just train horses, but really you could be doing all these things. Well, I just work with the kids in this way, but actually you're doing all these things. How do you think how do you help people? Either of you could jump in to answer this one. How do you help people to identify those myriad things that they do, and then to see which are the ones that they should prioritize in terms of getting data on?
Yes, I've done a bit of observation before of people in their practice, and that was the experience that you mentioned, where they sort of thought they were probably doing quite well, but they didn't necessarily know exactly what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually sent me a syllabus, and it was all, they do these tasks and things like that. They groom the pony. And then I went there and saw these facilitators using this enormous array of practices that are already evidence-based.
Okay.
So, things like unconditional positive regard. And
What does that mean?
so always always communicating with the participant in a kind of positive, in a way that doesn't detract from them as a person. So even if the child was being incredibly hyperactive and running around and buzzing about, they'd say, "Oh, I love your energy. Let's go and build a fence," rather than "Stop it." It's got an entirely different energy. And they were so prepared to see the wonderful in every child. That was one of the other things.
That's positive regard.
Yeah. So it's an idea taken.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's ubiquitous in every riding school.
No, right? Which is why we've got these specialized centers
Yes.
that are specifically doing that rather than shouting to have your heel down.
Yes.
So yeah, they were so skilled. And something else that they did actually that, again, I think this comes from horses, but I was so impressed by this. A participant had kind of got flustered doing a task with a horse. It had gone slightly wrong, as things sometimes do. And a facilitator came over and sort of sorted it out, and it was no big deal. And they said, "Oh, do you want to go and skip that horse out, actually, just quickly? I think there's a few messes in there." And I looked, and the child went from really stressed and worried and anxious, and then they just went and took a minute on their own doing something useful. And I asked the facilitator, did you mean to do that? And they kind of thought about it and went, "No, like I didn't know I was doing that at all." So I think there's occasionally quite a lot of, if you're not totally sure how you're doing what you're doing, perhaps have somebody external come in, because you kind of can't see culture from within your own organization. And culture, we know, is a really huge part of it. So the way that the facilitators treat the horses, treat each other, treat the participants, all goes into culture. And that's what creates the sense of safety that we know is so important for people to make changes. So I hope that answered your question. How would you help? Go and just have somebody have a look.
So it sounds like people should actually reach out to you guys directly and say, would you guys come and look at our place? You guys are busy. How would they do that?
Share with each other as well. Share techniques, share ideas, for sure. There's a lot of expertise across organizations.
Now, can people actually bring you guys in as consultants that way?
Oh, yes, please. Do get in touch.
Okay. Well, talk to us about that. What would you do? How would you do it? How would they get in touch with you? What would the mechanism be? There might be people listening right now going, actually, I would quite like that. But how would I get a Kezia or an Anne in here to assess what we do?
So, Anne, correct me if I'm wrong, and please do build on this. The way that we have tended to work, firstly, again, I can't quite speak for Anne, but I'm sure everybody is welcome to reach out to either one of us. Definitely welcome to reach out to me. If you are sort of thinking about this and you're not quite sure what you want, you have no idea at all, you just think I should be doing something, then perhaps reach out to me and we'll figure it out, and then we'll go and talk to Anne. Or if you know what you want and it's a university to come and do some research, then absolutely go and speak to Anne, and perhaps I'll come in and perhaps I won't. And then, there's kind of any number of combinations. So the other thing that I do is consulting. So if you have a question that isn't perhaps a research question to publish a finding, but you do want somebody external to run things by or talk to about it, then you can always get in touch with me. And sometimes Anne and I will do that together as well.
Okay, so at the end of this podcast, we'll make sure that people know how to contact you directly. Okay, we're going to return to that. Anne, what are you guys working on? What are you working on right now that is of particular excitement to you? what's groundbreaking now in the field?
Yeah, we're building on what Kez said first. We're looking at doing what's called reverse coding with several equine assisted.
Reverse coding.
Yeah,
Does that mean that their computers go back to the Stone Age or something? Or
no, this means that we look at all the factors as Kez was describing and more, and we look at what qualities make the intervention effective and what characterizes equine assisted intervention. It's the culture and the other qualities and as well as the outcome, which we're interested in. And we believe that we can map those against existing behavior change theory or potentially build a new behavior change theory, which is related specifically to equine assisted services. So that's something that we're looking at doing in the next year, really, isn't it, Ken? So with Andrew Powell, who did reverse coding of weight loss or exercise programs. Forgive me, Andrew, I've forgotten, for his PhD, which was very exciting. So this is about a successful intervention, functioning interventions, but which haven't been designed with a behavior change theory in mind. So it's going along and looking at what they're actually doing and seeing which theory might fit, or whether in fact they're doing something quite unique and different, and it requires its own behavior change theory. So that's one strand. That's one strand of activity. I'm also working with some neuropsychologists and the university. We've done some electroencephalograms, so EEGs on humans interacting with horses, which captures your brain activity. We've done about 10 humans with horses so far, and we're going to do some more. And we found, and some of those were very, very experienced, and some were complete newbies. And we looked at the difference and there is a lot of differences in brain activity. The focus and the calmness, the relaxation is really well developed in experienced horse people in a way that it's not for others. That's our preliminary find. More
so experienced horse people have a better ability to self-regulate? Is that?
Yeah.
And then when you're looking at that science through the EEGs, are you seeing what? Because obviously if someone's coming as a client, perhaps they haven't been around horses very much. So presumably they're not going to show that same brain activity that someone with more experience is going to show.
No, we'll talk to be a bit more.
What point do you see that they begin to?
Yeah, well, we haven't done that work yet. We've just at the moment, we've just got the two extremes to compare.
Okay.
That's something for the future, but something we'd like to do next. And we're also planning to do some work with a company called Mammal Tech, who are based in Belgium.
Mammal Tech.
Mammal Tech, mammal.tech, and you can find them on the internet. And they've designed an EEG, a mobile EEG, like the human one, but it fits on the side of a head collar for horses. So our next plan this year is to do horse and human brain activity while they're...
Oh God, that sounds almost like, if horses could talk. I'd hate to put the EEG on my horses. Saying about me, it's like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. It's rippers in the stable again.
Yeah, it's very early days.
Anyway, we won't be doing that study.
Yeah. It's very early days and we don't fully understand the human brain or the equine brain. So, it's early science, but as a result, it's very exciting because these studies are basically about describing what's happening.
How did you hook up with those guys? That's an interesting project.
They either connected with the neuropsychologist or we connected with them. I can't remember, to be honest. We've just had a few meetings online and we're planning to do some data collection a bit later in the year. They've already done a handful of horse EEG. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So it's very exciting.
That sort of animal communication taken to the next level, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's thanks to the tech moving on massively because, the horses it was very difficult to do that kind of EEG on horses. They had to be sedated and have their heads shaved and all sorts of stuff. And the humans had to be in the lab to have it done because the tech has moved on so much. The human has to wear like a bathing cap, with a backpack on with a with a laptop in, which collects the data moment by moment. The only thing with it is it produces a mountain of data, EEG. So, but it's early days, but that's very exciting to me, and I'm going to be looking for some research funding to support that work later this year.
When the horse is wearing the EEG machine, though, presumably they're not carrying a huge laptop. So,
The horses are they do it with a mobile phone. Yeah.
They do it with a mobile phone.
So the horse wears, basically they have like a head collar with an extra bit on it with a sponge in. So they can, and they have a mobile phone which goes in a little pocket. So it's very, very, very simple and not invasive for them at all.
It's of course brilliant, but of course it's making me laugh because, so many of, for example, the kids that might be sent out to my program, people say, well, you shouldn't be on your device, you shouldn't be on your device. They can be like, well, why is that horse on his phone?
Yeah, why is that horse on his phone?
Horses, they're gaming. Yeah. That's fascinating stuff. I'm so glad I'm talking to you. I had no idea people were even doing these things.
Mm. Yeah.
How many of you guys are there in this field of really researching equine assisted now? Is it suddenly everyone and their dog, or is it still just a real handful of you?
Yeah, I think there's an increasing number. There has, as you said, there's a lot of PhDs done on equine assisted, which is great in one way, but those studies are limited by them being PhDs, if that makes sense, because you've only got one person and it all has to be their own work. And, it's once you get into a team situation, like Kez and I, or myself and Zun He, the neuroscientist I work with, you can do a lot more, and even in bigger teams, you do, it increases again. So there's that issue. And also it has been, I think, a lot of people in psychology doing equine assisted studies, which is great, but that kind of evidence is not acceptable always in other disciplines.
Tell us the name again.
So,
I just missed it, of the neuroscientist that you're working with.
Zunhe, Xunhe.
Xunh, Zunhe. And where is Zunhe located?
He's in my university with
University of Bournemouth. Why is he interested in this? Is he a horseman?
He's not, but he has had a go now. He has to baptism by fire, in order to do the study. But
why was he interested in the study then, if he's not?
Human and animals, as part of his background and his original studies and things. He has that background.
Have you guys reached out to or doing any work with Nina Ekholm-Frey at the University of Denver with the Institute for Human Animal Connection Communication?
I have met her, but it was some years ago. I'm trying to remember.
She's an old mate of mine, and actually I just had her on the podcast. I think she just went live.
Cool.
I would love to put you guys in touch, because
absolutely. I'm always keen to. I did the thing a few years ago to invite everyone, to come together, people who had published and things. But it is scattered kind of across the world, and then unfortunately there's, like you were referring to a bit, Rupert. There's slightly a disciplinary silo.
Really?
Slightly disciplinary silos going on. And academia is extremely competitive.
Yes, it is. No, it is. Absolutely. I mean, one's job is dependent on the funding one gets. Yeah. So it's the sort of vested interest in being right.
Funding and publication is really, is the current thing.
What's interesting though is, there was me saying off the cuff, what about Nina Ekholm-Frey, University of Denver? The fact that we're even, or that you said earlier, well, what about, Hetty, they should reach out to Hetty. Yeah. The fact that institute in Denver is even there, or that you guys are even doing what you're doing, or that Hetty is even existing now, I think shows us really in the field how far we've come. Yeah. And it seems to me like we were all so busy, and now we suddenly put our heads up, I think somewhere after COVID, and realized, oh my gosh, actually, there's quite a lot of people out there doing this, the research and the academic side of it now.
And having the different disciplines is, to me, is always hugely beneficial, because it's when you bring those disciplines together, like myself and Zunhee, because Kez is from a different discipline, aren't you, originally?
Yeah, psychology, actually.
Yeah.
Psychology
And
and
I'm from,
science.
and I'm from a public health background, and
Okay.
you all bring different skills and different insights and different research methodologies, and I think that's fantastically beneficial. And also, the research funders do too, and they're very keen now to much more keen to fund cross-disciplinary research, because it's where the new discoveries are, essentially, where the exciting science happens.
Yes, absolutely. The alchemy when you mix different chemicals together. Harking back to the study that you guys did on the domestic violence, that's extraordinary, 51% reduction, and still there after a year. The horse course. Shout out to the horse course. Well done, guys. Hats off. Sounds like
Well, Harriet Laurie, who's the CEO, she just got an MBA.
Yeah, I was seeing that on the I forget which media they did. Well, clearly well earned. Harriet Laurie. That's also something we should all be looking at. Is that kind of, we started this conversation with talking about behavioral change, and you're in public health, and obviously domestic violence, well, that's a huge public health issue. What's the next stage on from that study? Because that sounds like a really good trailblazer. Where do you want to see that go?
What I've been trying to do, a bit not very successfully, is to get everyone in the equine assisted services world to think about whether they work with supported families in the UK. Now, supported families are the families which, and these programs have a different name in every county, which doesn't help. I realise doesn't help. But these are families who are have multiple problems, and who the local authority have some extra funding to support, and they might be sending them or members of the family to your equine assisted services. Okay. Because what would be really exciting is to do a multi-centre assessment of equine assisted services in relation to the supported families. And supported families is a government policy in the UK, whether it's called, whatever it's called, in your county, it might be called something different. We're working with Horsewell in Bristol, and it's called something different in Bristol than it is in Dorset. So, but it would be really exciting to be able to, because that's what we call secondary data analysis. So this is data that already exists. It's already anonymized. You don't have to bother your vulnerable families with it. You don't have to collect it yourselves. The local authority is already collecting it.
Okay.
And I think that has the potential to open up, to give it more insight into where the equine assisted services are working. Because that program, until you produce results in that data that's collected by the local authority on these multiple data points every 3 months, until you start to positively impact on those areas, you don't get paid. So it's quite obvious, if you're getting paid by the local authority for children and families that are coming to you on this program, then you're having some kind of impact, and it's hidden in the data that's at the local authorities. And we would love to get our sticky fingers on it, frankly. But I think secondary data is something that people forget about. They think they've got to do all the data collection in-house in the equine assisted service. And if they've got referrers, which is why that referral process and the follow-up, et cetera, is so important, then you may have data that you're not even aware of.
Okay, so let's just recap on that. This is useful. So let's say a listener is working in the UK, has a program in the UK, and they have supported families being sent to them, being referred to them. So is what they need to do go to the referrers and say, why are you continuing to refer people to us?
Yeah.
Or should they be contacting you and saying, these are the referrers who have now been referring these people to us for X amount of time.
Yeah.
Do you, Anne and Kez, want to contact them to find out why? Which should they do?
Well, initially, we won't be allowed to have any information from the local authority. It needs to come from the equine assisted service that they're commissioning. And if
Okay.
they go to them and say, are we taking supported families or on our intervention? Are you collecting data on us therefore? Because what you'd need to have is a data sharing agreement, which we had to do that paper, which Kez was talking about. And that data sharing agreement needs to be between the local authority, the police, because there's crime data in there, health services, because there's health data in there, and social services, because there's social care data in there as well. And then, so it's quite a process, as most good things are. But it could, even if we just have a handful of places that are receiving, are working with those families, it would be fascinating to see how equine assisted is functioning in that arena.
So, for example, within Horseboy, should I reach out to, say, the handful of our most busy practitioners in the UK
Yeah,
and say, hey, look, was just
yeah,
chatting with Anne Hemingway.
yeah,
She says, she's asking, are you receiving supported families?
yeah.
And if
Because
they
the
say
thing is,
yes,
the
what
thing
should
is,
I tell them to do as the next step?
and to approach the local authority and ask if they're collecting data
Approach the local
on their
authority.
outcome. Yeah,
Okay. And then ask if they've got data.
yeah.
And then if the local authority says, yes, we do, then what should they do?
Well, then they can, if they want to, they can contact us and say,
Okay.
we might have some fantastic trouble supported families data that you can sweat over and analyze.
For example, I could also just put you in direct touch with these people and you could ask them yourself.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
are you too busy
absolutely.
for that?
Yeah, no, it'd be fine because I think it
Are
would be.
you actively hunting this data at this
Well,
point?
yeah.
Okay.
The reason being that this policy is up for review in 2025, this government policy. So
Okay.
if we don't do it soon, the nature of it might change. And rather than having years of the same data to analyze and big numbers, which is what an observational study is, our sample was between 13 and 14,000, wasn't it, Kez, I think,
Yeah.
altogether?
Yeah.
Well, that will be lost. That opportunity to analyze that, and often those families are being referred to equine assisted services, I
Okay.
think, it will be gone. So if it's there now and we can do data sharing agreements and we can analyze it would be wonderful to get like a multi-center assessment of it.
Given that you're working in the UK, would centres working in Ireland also be of use for that? Or does it have to be only UK based?
I don't really know whether they have the same policy. It's worth asking the question, though, I suppose. You see, to me, it's worth having that dialogue with your referrer, your commissioner, always. Why are they sending? What outcomes are they after? What changes are they seeing? Because with the horse course, we do, and some of the others, we do before, at the end, and then 2 months later. And then you don't need to ask your vulnerable participants to do anything. The referrers can make the assessment.
Right. Okay. And so let's say you're hunting this data now, and that's the follow up to your domestic violence study. What
Yeah.
would you hope would be the outcome? Basically, continued government funding for this, or
Well, I
increased
think,
government funding for this?
yeah, I think as a minimum, it would show the commissioners that there's been an impact, what the impacts are from
Right.
the equine assisted work. That's basically it.
And then would
So-
you as University of Bournemouth, with your University of Bournemouth hat on, directly approach those commissioners, or would you just put that out there into the public domain and hope that they find it? Your study.
Yeah, well, no, we published it, but we also always make the final paper available to the equine assisted service we've been working. So,
But
and
in terms of
also,
the commissioners, would you then
well,
direct?
the equine assisted services themselves can share it with the commissioners, or we
Okay.
can if they, but they can share it with the commissioners, and we can share. I mean, it is possible to do like a press release as well, because
Okay.
that's quite a big deal. Those findings we had before were a big deal. There's not many interventions, sadly, for domestic violence which prospectively prevent it. There's a lot of recovery programs because as a society, we obviously don't care about domestic violence. Otherwise, we'd be doing something about it very early on in children's lives. But I'll shut up at that point. But as it is, we only focus on recovery. We don't focus on prevention.
What is your this is obviously something you care quite passionately about, particularly the domestic violence one. I think it's good that you do. And I think you're right. I think that most countries actually don't care. And I think they don't care only because it's only been thought of as something wrong
Yeah.
relatively recently. Like, that's a mind blower. But if you think about Christian doctrine, for example, that, or let's take it out of domestic context. I am from the last generation of males in the UK who were probably regularly, like weekly or every few days, beaten right at school. We were beaten. And at the time, nobody saw anything wrong with that. It was legal. And so and I know I'm ancient, but I'm not that ancient. So that's a change that we've seen in a generation. So I think you're right that the previous generations didn't really see that much wrong with it, unless it went beyond a certain point, unless someone was hospitalized, or unless somebody was, that entire home was broken up, or something radical happened. But not just
but the reality is that women, 2 or 3 women are killed every week in the UK by someone who is most commonly over 90% is
absolutely. And if you look at most religious texts, for example, they kind of say it's all right. They do, and so it's not surprising that people get brought up in those beliefs and perpetuate them. But I would agree with you that the not caring we've inherited this in the same way that we've inherited warfare, and the same way that we've inherited many things that we're only just beginning to think maybe we shouldn't.
And it's very interesting. I think it refers back to your point. There's obviously the historian coming out, but it refers back to your earlier point about what shifted about equine assisted. Maybe the shift is that we now care about the equine assisted outcomes in a way that we didn't in the past.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I think we could even say we care about mental health now.
Yeah.
And perhaps even only since COVID, in a way that we just frankly haven't. And that's kind of new. And sadly, business is good, right? Unfortunately, because, we're all nuts. I know I am. In fact, I have say that again, sorry?
I say there's nothing wrong with it per se. It's just a bit bothered people.
Well, it's when all my multiple personalities start to argue with each other, it gets a bit bothersome. Yeah. Keep me up at night. So in your guys' perfect world, let's take this domestic violence thing, and then you go to your secondary gathering of that data from supported families, which I'm sure you're going to do. And I will do anything I can to help you with that. Let's put ourselves ahead 5 years, 10 years. What do you guys want to see?
You go first, Nick.
To be honest, we're seeing the start of it now with things like the CAMS mental health service referring young people to equine assisted services.
If I'm an American listener, what's CAMS?
CAMS is the kind of, good question, the UK mental health provision that's kind of available on the NHS.
National Health Service.
Yeah, on the National Health Service. So it's almost like if your insurance provider got behind it, I suppose.
Okay.
But what that means is that it's starting to become more available to the people who we know need it and who we know it is working for. So it's all kind of cycling around. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see more of, is just accessibility to people who need it, and knowing that it's been delivered in a way that works.
But what would that specifically look like? For example, I just got back from Norway, and I was interviewing for this podcast a really interesting lady there, Norun Kogstad, Dr. Norun Kogstad. She's a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist and a doctor, and she's running this really interesting center. And I said, why is this supported? Why are you getting all these people sent to you in Norway? What's special about Norway? She said, well, Rue, in Norway, we have a tradition actually of having stables in mental hospitals. And we actually have had that since at least 100 years. And it's something a bit specific to Norway. She went into the she went into the history of why that was, and that they're fighting for it now because it's being eroded. For example, is that something that you'd like to see in your guys' perfect world? Would there be a stable and a farm in every hospital, for example?
Well, I think that's part of why I do the research, is to understand in what way the access is best provided so that, resources can be used in the most effective way. So, yeah, it would be great to eventually see it supported by the infrastructure, but I don't yet have an idea of exactly how that would be.
But you can fantasize. A girl can dream. What would you, in your perfect world, what would this landscape of mental health in the UK, based on the research that you and people like you have done, we're looking ahead 20 years, in a perfect world, what's it looking like?
It's a really good question, and for me, it's just too early. I really don't.
Go on, have a crack at it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten involved in this in the first place. Of course, you have a dream. What is it?
Well, I mean, the dream is that everybody who needs access can get it, but I haven't taken that to a systems approach yet where I can make it work.
Anne?
Yeah, I think I want to be confident, as confident as we can be, that it doesn't. It's a positive, that we can ensure that it's a positive thing for the horses as well. What I wrote down when I was preparing for this, I said, what are the horses getting out of this relationship?
Mhm.
And for me, if we are in 20 years still offering equine assisted, then what are they getting out of it? And are we fully bought into the prey animal need in terms of how they're kept? Freedom, friends and forage as a very beginning to all of this. Are we still keeping them as prisoners?
Right.
So for me, it's about
Freedom, friends, and forage. I like that.
In the process of doing this, that we're not burdening them with it, with our stuff.
Mm.
And to be honest, I've seen lots of different models, and some are, I think, more strongly than others, but we're still not really in a position. Apart from the fact that we do have a lot of research now in terms of what benefits horses in terms of their keeping, in terms of their everyday living and their relationship, that is still being ignored by, I would say, massive parts of the horsey community outside of EAF, So I'm hoping that as we
Outside
start,
of the what?
outside of equine assisted service,
Okay. Right.
where the sports world, particularly racing, is ignoring the needs of the equine. And we have very strong research evidence now that shows how the horses should be kept for the majority of their lives, and what their needs are, and what makes them stressed, and what the physiological signs of that are, etc. And it's still largely being ignored. So,
Well, I think that's true, honestly, within the equine assisted world as well. I work in about 40 countries, and what I see isn't always good. And it's sometimes not good because the people have any intention of harming or being bad to their horses. It's just simply a traditional approach that hasn't developed yet. But it's tricky because, you go there and you say, well, actually, I can't work with you under these conditions. Are you willing to make these changes in the way the horses are kept? And actually, I find to a large degree, people often do step up and say, yeah, actually, why not? And then occasionally, sometimes they say, sort of, and then, oh, well, you can't.
yeah.
But that's an interesting thing. We know this is a hard thing to standardize. For example, there is an amazing lady called Lucy Dillon who is running a facility at St. Joseph's. We used to be St. Joseph's School for Blind, it's now Child Vision in Dublin. And they do incredible work. And they're one of the projects that we work with. And I've known them, I've been working with them since 2013, I think. And they have almost no room. They're an urban resource. And what they do with what they've got is extraordinary. And if they were to disappear, it would be a major loss to the community. And they have to really struggle to give the horses what they need. And they actually do a great job, and they rotate them in and out of the city, and they have it down, and they're very, very good horse people. But, someone from the outside could go in and say, well, that shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be in that place. These things are hard to standardize. How would we deal with the nuances of this?
What I think it would be about compromise, as most things are, so you'd look at managing things in a way which considers the horse's needs. And I think, as you said, you can achieve freedom, friends and forage in even very small space if you apply your mind to it. And it's about what's important, whether the horse's needs and the horse's relationships are put at the forefront of what you're doing. And for me, that's absolutely where I see equine assisted services having a massive influence. Because imagine all those people who come through and they can be learning about the nature of the horse and what their needs are. And now there's so many thousands of people going through equine assisted services all around the world. If that part of the job was taken on in a conscious way, and that's why Hetty, is so great, and ISIS are great as well around the, trying to come up with welfare recommendations and things.
Give us the name of the other organization again.
International Equine Science. International Society of
Equine Science.
International Society of Equine Science, I think it is. It's ISIS.
ISIS.
Slightly unfortunate.
Interesting name.
Yeah, it's been around a long time.
Not their fault, though. Yeah.
No, not their fault. So, but, people are trying to do that. But I think it for me, if I had, my dream is that equine assisted services really pick up that baton and they say, okay, we're not using that word, but we're working with horses to help people. Let's use this work to help the equine, because it might not be horses, it might be donkeys or whatever.
Yeah,
which is absolutely right. Equine, broad church, as it were. But if we could do that, if that could happen, then I think that would make a really massive positive change in the world, because there'd be all these thousands of people who understand the nature of the horse and understand what they need in a way that they don't at the moment. And it may even spread out into other prey animals. Who knows?
Right. Well, I guess maybe the obviously there's a wisdom in what you're saying that's self-evident, but maybe the wisdom that's behind that wisdom is the hint of wisdom is that if you have programs where the welfare of the horse is part of the program.
Yeah.
Then now we have those, for example, we have something which we've recently actually renamed it, and I'll be announcing it, but it's exactly that. It's how you rehab and train and maintain the therapy horse, and that we realized that first that came organically of just people wanting to help out who had been clients, who now became volunteers, who now became and had some skills. And then we realized, oh my gosh, that's so empowering.
Yeah.
And so now we do this with the German army, we do this with the US Air Force, we do this with first responders, we do this. It's usually trauma based, and they're all right. It's all unmounted, but it's preparing the horses for the mounted work that's done.
Yeah.
And the donated horses that come in kind of broken and turning them back into really horses with a lot of well-being.
Yeah.
Of course, how can a horse give well-being to a human if it doesn't have well-being itself? But what's interesting with that, I think, as you say, that I guess is the hint of wisdom behind what you say, is that apart from the obvious benefit for the human and benefit for the horse in terms of the therapy for one and the rehab of the other, there's, I think, also an understanding, therefore, of how nature works.
Yeah.
And then going back to where we started this conversation, how relationship works, which doesn't have to be delivered as we are now having a therapy session in how relationship works. Because if you're just involved in the welfare and well-being of these animals, well, surely that's going to be an automatic byproduct of that, because otherwise it couldn't happen. And my dream would be, based on your work, would be that there would be an equine assisted, but not limited to equine assisted, a nature-based program that includes equine assisted. Because I often think it's a bit limiting if the horse is the only game you've got. And I speak as a massively obsessive horseman. but nonetheless, not everyone's into horses, and one needs a greater mosaic. But let's say there was a nature-based thing about every 5 kilometers. That
Yeah.
would be my dream. And but if my dream came true, because even if there was one every 5 kilometers, we still wouldn't be able to deal with the demand, the number of people needing that service. Because you can't. How many people can you actually serve without diluting it or overwhelming the animals or having too high?
Well, some other work that we're involved in is producing a virtual reality version of an equine assisted intervention.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So for people who aren't able to access horses, or
Okay.
as you mentioned earlier on, where it would be inappropriate for the horse's welfare to have them in a particular situation.
Okay.
And also for people, say, who are in hospital or in prison or, can't get out into nature for any reason, or hospice, like Kez mentioned, be able to have because virtual reality
That's such a good idea.
is turning out to be there's some early studies showing it's really effective. It kind of almost magnifies the natural processes because our brains kind of fill in the hole, if you like, within what we're seeing.
Yeah, the human imagination is the most powerful tool.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yes, you
we're
could then
exploring that.
customize it and personalize it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can choose your horse, you can choose where you are, you can choose, and
Would it be like a game? Would it be sort of an equine assisted Minecraft sort of thing?
Game. So once you get your communications, once you're calm and assertive, etc., then the horse responds appropriately. If you're not, if you're too fast and you're angry,
you get trumped up.
you get all those kinds of behaviors that you do with a real horse.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
amazing to see in the imagination. You actually come up with a bruise, or does a boxing glove come out of or a hammer come out of that?
Well, I tried the early version of it before it was properly put together.
Oh, this exists?
Yeah, we've done it. We've got a little pilot version of it, and I tried it. And the horse, the virtual horse, kind of walked through me. Now, this has happened to me so many times in my life, but I had to take the helmet off because the goggle thing, because this part of my body went numb because it was expecting intense for me.
That's interesting.
I had this massive rush of adrenaline. My heart was bumping. I was because I expected to be knocked into the mud and and be very uncomfortable on that side of my body. Now I'm giving away how crap a horsewoman I am. But it has happened to me in the past. As it does sometimes with horses because they love to go forwards. But now I teach mine to go out of my space, so it doesn't happen anymore. She's there, famous last word. But yeah, and it was amazing. In that second, my brain just went, "Oh, this has happened before. This is ouch. It's gonna really hurt." Yeah, it was amazing. So,
well, I could see there's a couple of things. I could see helping to get people through their fear and anxiety that way, because if you have a massive cortisol response to, you're worried about being trodden on, knocked over or falling off.
Yeah.
You could maybe help people through that.
Yeah, absolutely. You could refine your, because a lot of being, again, as we said, being with horses is about managing your emotions and building relationships. And it's those skills, and you could polish your horsemanship on there too.
Totally. So you have done this game?
Yeah, we've got just a very preliminary version of it that we're trying to get funding to build more. So if anyone's listening who wants to fund this fantastic development, then please contact me. And again,
so University of Bournemouth is putting together this video game to provide equine-assisted virtual reality services through, I think you called it in the scientific term, the goggle thing, like the machine that goes bing. Okay, but you guys are putting this together, and
yeah, we have a team. We have sensor scientists.
Can I come and check it out?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Dr. Roya Harasian is our sensor scientist. Dr. Fred Charles is our VR specialist.
Okay.
And then he is working on it again because we're the preliminary developments will be informed by what's happening in your brain to make sure that that people get a positive outcome.
How far along is this game?
We have a kind of partly working pilot, but we need to make a big step forward in terms of the sensors. So as the sensors that people wear in what's quite an active, interactive process, they're not, you will need to use your body posture, etc. And we need a different type of sensor to capture that effective body posture and test that out. So that's the major block to what we've kind of got that far, and then we need to develop this sensor more. I mean, we're working with TGO, a company in London, who are sensor scientists and do
What's
mapping.
PTO?
TGO is a company
Okay.
who look at developing sensors as well. Yeah, so
Who
we've got
funds this?
well, that was the preliminary study for that, and the preliminary EEG studies for the Esme Fairbairn money. But again, we're so cutting edge that we're struggling for funding.
I bet.
So,
Could we do a follow-up podcast with your colleagues on this and go into it in depth? And
yeah,
maybe
and
we
we
can
can
dig it
show
up and
people
help find some funding.
how far we've got with it so far. But it's very basic at the moment. But we're looking at, we want to have this kind of quality that you get that's in Red Dead Redemption 2. That's what we want. If anyone knows about video games.
I've never played a video game in my life.
But why we think it'll be attractive to people as well is because the video games with horses in are really popular. There's so many very top video games which have horses in. And
I guess that makes sense though, doesn't it? Because the horse always represents freedom.
Yeah, and speed, and and lots of people like that kind of historical aspect to their gaming and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Need to come and play a visit.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to host you and go in the lab and have a go.
I'd love to. And I could show my crap horsemanship and get walked over. It's like always shaming, like when you sit on a simulator, you're like, oh yeah, I really do sit off to the right, don't I?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on?
Brilliant. I'm so glad you let us know about this, because when you said that you were putting this VR thing together, my mind immediately went to a girl that I was working with about 2 years ago, I live in Germany, as you know, and we work with a lot of kids who come from an international school. And she was South Korean and really, really, really horse obsessed, like lived it, breathed it. And her family, they had to go back to South Korea. And I was like, well, I hope you can keep going with the horses. And the mum said, Rupert, there's no way. And she just explained life and soul. And she explained how the horse world, as limited as it is there, works, and how it's only for a very tiny sliver of people. And then and she said also, Rupert, the problem is that, our society is so, this is her words, old school in terms of its harsh approach to teaching, that there's no way that my daughter could cope with that. And it made me really sad to think that there was this girl who used to ride with us through these forests in Germany, and now she wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. And I knew it was breaking up. And she contacts me from time to time asking about the horses, and I send her, pictures and bits of them and so on. But something like this, if she was sitting in the middle of a concrete, wasteland albeit a luxurious one, still it's concrete is concrete. Something like this would be really wonderful.
Yeah, and she still get that connection, and also she'll be able to practice, being being a really good horsewoman, and then leaving South Korea and going somewhere where she can ride and be with horses however she wants when she's grown up, kind of thing.
Right, yeah, because as you say, it would hone the skills. It would keep the skills alive.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. So
that's exciting.
Another dream. I don't know how I have time. I don't have enough life left for all these dreams, but I'm working on it.
Well, we know that we can bend reality.
Yeah.
Parallel universes. Exactly. At the same time, I'm a great believer in them. I refuse to believe that I can't do something. It's just, logic is there to be defied, I've always felt.
Yeah, exactly. Don't say no, because it just sets me off. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for the info. Okay. Kez, what are you we've talked about dreams. Is there something you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so I'm always excited to we're working with a few organizations at the moment, looking at getting more of an evidence base for that one. And we're also looking into really compiling what we know already, because at a certain point, we're just going to have it in a kind of binder that you can throw at people. And hopefully it'll weigh about 2.5 kilos.
So that won't be with the goggles on, that will actually be a proper bruise
A
on it.
real brick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a brick.
To make a satisfying thunk. Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of streamline the process for people, I suppose, of really translating the many facets of the practice into
What would be
something.
in that binder, and who would you give that binder to?
So in the binder would be so I suppose this is the dream binder, is how it works and why it works and who it works for and what it works for with those people. And as Anne said, how best to do it so that it's a nice symbiotic relationship.
Mhm.
And I think that stretches even further than between the horses and the participants, but all the way out to, communities and infrastructures and things like that. Because whenever you alleviate problem for a group of people, whatever that problem is, kind of problems breed problems, right? Which means that solutions breed solutions. And then slowly everything gets kind of more peaceable, we hope.
So, but the binder, would that be for local authorities, for example, who might fund, or would it be for prospective people getting into the field, or both?
Yeah, I think both, but also, really for the decision makers. So whether it's looking at where funding goes at a policy level, or whether it's a school deciding, do we send them here or to something else? It would be that.
Okay.
So that would be a collection of core outcomes.
Yeah.
For people who are buying, rearing, setting up, establishing.
Yeah.
Oh, so it would be, if you were setting a place up, you could have this binder, and then you could go along with that to your local authority and say, see, this is why it doesn't suck. This is why you should fund us.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it's gaining recognition, but it still doesn't really complete, people are still kind of having to explain why it doesn't suck.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can make that easier, then good.
And I like the idea of also having in there a series of guidelines for how to keep the horse, because also from a local authority point of view, even if they don't really care, they know that they sort of will be held to it by animal rights people and so forth. And that's becoming more and more, people we're all more and more under scrutiny for this. So I think to give people a series of best practices which are recommended will also help them to avoid that sort of trouble. Things that they might not have occurred to them in the way they're keeping their horses, just because that's the way it's always been done. I think we've all grown up with that to some degree. And
there's another dimension to that, really, which is about rewilding. Rewilding of the natural environment to increase biodiversity. And horses are equines are used or are part of that rewilding often because they're an ancient grazer, and they help to manage the environment in a very healthy way. So all the things that we thought about traditionally about how horses, you get horse-thick paddocks, and you don't want to put horses on the land because they mess it up. When in fact the poaching, the lawns and the rough that they create are very healthy and very positive for increasing biodiversity. And Net, the big estate that's been doing that for the last 25 years, 25 years in the south of England, they have Exmoor ponies on there, and they have cows, these very ancient version of cows with long horn, because they break up the land and they graze on different things, but they don't graze everything. They're picky. And that's what you want. You want, thistles and stinging-nettles and gorse and whatever it is. You want a variety of different levels of bush, and then you want lawns where the grass is short for some butterflies, and overall that increases biodiversity. It looks messy to us, and we're terrible in the horse world for trying to keep everything clean and non-messy, but actually we manage millions of acres globally for horses, and they could be our friends for rewilding that acreage around increasing biodiversity as well. That also needs to be in Kezia's brick.
Okay, we'll make sure of it.
No
I'm a big fan of rewilding, and one of the things which we do with when we do horse boy courses and movement method courses, we always have people plant trees as part of it.
Yeah.
I try and plant a tree for every day of my life, and it's actually not that difficult. What we do is we go out with the kids and we gather in shopping bags in cities, acorns and chestnuts and things like that, falling on concrete. And then we take them out and plant them along fence lines. And it's amazing how they come up.
Yeah.
And so if you're working with a kid over, say, or any client over more than 1 year, they'll tend to see their line of acorns.
Start to emerge. It's very exciting, yeah.
And I'm always trying to get horse people to plant their fence lines. I like hedgerow.
Yeah, I do too. And I like to let it get on my little bit of land. I like the hedges to be thick.
Yeah.
Because what I've noticed is the more brambles and stuff you have, the baby trees come up on their own in there because they don't get eaten by the deer or the horses. They're protected,
Absolutely.
and they actually get the chance to get going. So
absolutely. Yeah. And
but it's that it's that interconnection and those relationships that it's that web of life and the equine system in so many different ways has the opportunity to benefit the land that they work on, the communities they work with, and the people that they have passed through there. So,
would you say so we're approaching the 2-hour mark, and there's so much more to go with. So I'd actually quite like to have you guys on again, if that would be all right. And we could develop this further. There's a question I'd like to ask you now, which is kind of where we began, which is you got into this through public health and obviously your love of horses, but basically through public health and behavior change. We've gotten all the way through some of the studies and then also how you keep the equines well, which is part of keeping humans well, because if humans are keeping equines well, and then we got into rewilding. And I talked about hunter-gatherers, and the hunter-gatherers that I spent time with are always the most functional human beings I've ever met. I've never met more functional human beings than the San Kalahari Bushmen that I've hung out with in Botswana and Namibia. They just are the nicest people on the planet. And is it, in fact, what we need in public health?
Yeah.
Is what we need the rewilding of the human brain?
Yeah. We need to see ourselves as part of nature, and that we are nature and nature is us. And we don't do ourselves any favors thinking we're above or not impacted by it, or we don't need it, or that we're in control of it. All of those things have proved very negative for us. We need to be humble and realize that our well-being is totally dependent on us realizing that we're part of nature and engaging with that side of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Accepting imperfection and dealing with it, and not wanting to be tidy all the time.
Well, phew, because luckily you can see my Zoom, but you can't see the floor.
You know why it's dark in here? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I noticed Kez is blurred out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very wise. Kez has been in my house. She knows that there's no corner without mess. Listen, I think a lot of people would like to know how they can get in contact with you. So, Anne, can you fire away? What are the contacts that people can?
Yeah, my email is open to everyone. I'm A Hemingway. That's AHEMINGWAY at bournemouth.ac.uk, and it's BOURNE mouth.ac.uk. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find it if you put me Anne Hemingway, Anne without an E and Hemingway with one M. You put me into the internet, then I come up.
Anne Hemingway without an E. I like how you were A Hemingway, not the Hemingway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it's spelt the same way.
Yes. Okay. So Anne Hemingway. and Hemingway all together?
Yeah. No, you can just to Google me, just put it in
Okay,
as normal
just Google
writing.
Anne Hemingway, Bournemouth
And then
University,
it's
and your email will come
that
up.
would just come up. Okay, come.
Okay, that's easy. All right, Kez.
Yeah, I think best to Google Anne because I have a slightly different email address for you. Maybe you have too. But in terms of my contact details, you can get in touch with me at Kezia Sullivan at hotmail.co.uk. So that would be Kezia Sullivan SULLIVAN at hotmail.co.uk. Or there's a website, which is again just keziasullivan.co.uk.
And if people wanted to have you guys come in and consult with them and actually help them figure out how to compile their data, how to get studies done, what we didn't go into, gosh, because we got the conversation got so interesting. What we slightly forgot to go into, perhaps we should go into that a little bit now, is you do have mechanisms for helping people get some studies out there, right?
Yeah.
Without having to raise $1 million to go do something at a university and without it taking 57,000 years to do, and without having to know these high priests of these universities somehow, that you guys have streamlined it. Can you just give us a bit of the quick and dirty on how that can happen? So if someone thinks they've got data and they'd like to get some studies or a study done on them, what they do that's published and peer reviewed or whatever, what would you do? How's that? How will it work?
So the most common thing that happens is that people will get in touch with either me or Anne. We'd have a meeting to look at what the needs are and to see what kind of thing might be useful and put together kind of a plan for maybe doing that. And sometimes that's research. Sometimes, if people haven't got any data, then we'll help them to design the outcome measures or to find suitable ones. Or if people have a lot of data, then we'll start where they are, I suppose.
Okay. So basically the shout out is, listeners, if you think that you've got good data, if you think you've got a program that it would be helped if there was a study, maybe it will help you find funding, etc. But it also just helps the general field develop. Please contact Anne and Kez and they will help you get going on the road to that, which might have seemed like an inaccessible or impossible thing. It isn't. It can be done.
Yeah. And we're not the only show on the road, as I said. We're not the only people. There are other people who are working in the area as well. So sometimes you can make relationships. Sometimes it's easier for us to make relationships with other academics too.
Okay, so you could look at them and say, well, if not you would put them in contact with other academics then.
Yeah.
I'll always refer people on if that's useful.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, it is incredibly useful. I know this myself because although it never occurred to us to get studies done on us, the fact that we did, or the fact that it happened, has been massively helpful. And to the point that I hope you guys will attend. We got been asked by the Medical School of Eastern Virginia in the USA to put on a neuroscience conference this September, which is astonishing to me that we got asked by medical school to do that. But that's going to be a gathering of academics. There's some really good headline speakers there. Temple Grandin's going to be the headliner, and Dr. Stephen Peters, who's the, autistic and a neuroscientist and a horseman. Dr. Alison Murchu, but I would hope that you guys would be able to come. And then you guys also mentioned the HETI. I guess listeners should know that there's a conference, right? This HETI is having its conference in June, is it?
In Budapest.
In Budapest. Great excuse to go to Budapest.
Yeah.
The reason I would urge you listeners to go and do that stuff if you're running programs is that's where you will meet these types of academics and people doing this research. And if you meet them, then you know them and you can ring them up and hassle them and say, hey, what about my thing, and get something done. But if you don't ever make contact with them, you might not know. So things like Hetty are a great resource. It's true. How many other universities, just before we wrap up, in the UK that you know of and are doing this kind of research into the equine assisted?
I think it's all the universities that have been doing studies looking at horses and horse care and things for a very long time. And there's all kind of parts of universities that do animal husbandry and all those kind of things. And they're dotted around all over the UK as well. It's a bit less maybe in terms of the horse-human connection, the horse-human interaction.
Are you the only ones doing it, or are there a couple of other universities people should look to?
Well, for nature-based interventions, there's Exeter's doing work on it, and Derby, I think, are doing work on it. And there may be academics in their local university who are working on it. It's worthwhile having a look through, the websites and things to look at what people are doing. Because sometimes people do, if they're doing their PhD on it, for instance, or if they're doing a long study, they may not be publishing anything. You know what I mean? It's quite hard to know who's doing what.
Yeah.
I've examined a couple of PhDs on equine assisted in Derby.
In Derby?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is happening, but it depends. It's more ethology, or learning about horses maybe, or learning about horse welfare, or how to train horses, or the tax at horse, saddles. There's a whole range of different specialities. But it's just a bit more limited in terms of that interaction.
Do you think it's fair to say that University of Bournemouth is pioneering the field in the UK for this, looking at the equine assisted world?
Well, I don't know. It makes my head feel too big. I don't think I can say that.
Which means it is. I'll take that as a yes. All right.
Because there are other people who've been studying it for a lot longer than me, but they're looking at it in different ways. And there's also people studying with other animals, so therapy animals. So it might be dogs or cats or a variety of different things. And then there's the whole vet thing as well. There's loads of vet schools, but I would say I haven't seen a lot coming out from anywhere, particularly around EAS.
Do you see the University of Bournemouth perhaps being able to offer a degree course at some point in equine assisted best practice, or equine, something around the equine assisted field?
Yeah, I mean, that's problematic with universities in the UK at the moment, because they want to have lots of students on their course because of their financial situation.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, students who come to the university learn about the research that we're doing on a variety of different programs already, but it's more of a multidisciplinary approach.
Right.
So I guess nothing's impossible, nothing's impossible. Never say never, kind of thing.
Well, that would be maybe another dream of mine would be that people going into that field might be able to go and do it at a university, and or several universities, and that this is now that it will look ahead 10 years and maybe it's just become an accepted field in mental health. And
yeah, exactly. And I think there's a program which has been developed, which the horse course and other providers, Horse World as well, I think, are starting to provide a diploma in which has just been launched last year, which was a great step forward. It's accredited as kind of an adult education program.
Yeah, that is accredited.
Yeah, so that's a big step forward anyway. But yeah, it would be great. And I was contacted by a nursing school in New York last year who were putting it as part of their undergraduate program as a for mental health nurses.
There's a man in Ireland who you should be in contact with, and I wish I could get him on the show, but he refuses to do any public speaking at all. But he's extraordinary. He's called David Doyle, and he works for the St. Joseph's Foundation in County Cork, and he runs something called Liskennet Farm. I'll put you in touch with him. Listeners, you need to know who David Doyle is. And he's created one of the most cutting edge equine assisted places that I've ever seen. He, like me, has a personal story. It's his daughter. And it grew up from there, but they're now opening multiple facsimile centers around Ireland because it's worked so incredibly well. And he has also managed to get accredited courses going through some of the universities there. So perhaps I could put you in touch with him. And then for listeners David Doyle, just Liskennet or St. Joseph's Foundation. It's Charleville in Ireland, like Charles without the S, with a Ville on the end of it. He's one of the great unsung heroes of the field, and seems stubbornly insisting on remaining so, annoyingly. But for what you're doing, Anne and Kez, I think it's people like you and he must collaborate, because it's bringing the field forward in ways that we couldn't have dreamed of 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Maybe we could persuade him if he kept his camera turned off.
Maybe you guys could persuade him. He's very good at saying no to me, but maybe. Yeah.
Maybe we try a 2-pronged attack, 3-pronged
Indeed.
attack. I mean, you could have an avatar of his choosing. So
They what, sorry?
And you could have an avatar or a face of his choosing instead. So you could get one of the horses to speak for him or something.
Oh, my imagination just went into virtual reality mode. Yeah. I better get those goggles on.
Yeah.
Before Kez thunks me with a new book, a brick. Listen, guys, thank you so much for coming on. Would you come on again and we can develop this further?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really a lot of fun. I hope people were okay with us rambling around the topic in general. But it was a lot of fun to do. I hope it's a lot of fun to listen to as well.
Well, no, you guys were actually very you've been very succinct. I mean, you've told us how the field is developing, what's going on, how people can get studies done. This thing, for example, this domestic violence study that you guys have done, this is groundbreaking. And now the stuff with the virtual reality and the EEGs, and amazing. Oh, EEGs! I only just got it. Slow on television. I should have gotten there.
I'm going to steal that one.
I want 30%.
Yeah.
I mean 50. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. No. So there's a lot within those studies that I'd like to go into further. But I think what listeners have come away with is knowing that not only is the field advancing in this way, but they themselves can get studies done, and that they can contact you. And I know, just as someone who has a program that's of incredible value to people, because it's often seen as something unobtainable. And basically you're demystifying it, which is a great service. It's a great public service you guys are doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity, for sure.
All right. So chaps, Anne Hemingway, Bournemouth University, Google her. Kez, just give us your email one more time in case they forgot to run.
Yeah, so it's Kezia Sullivan, SULLIVAN @hotmail.co.uk.
Perfect. Get in touch with them and get a study done, basically. All right. Okay. So until next time, thank you guys. I'm going to hit that dreaded red button, but I'm really grateful that you came on, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.